Hey everyone, thanks for joining today. My name is Eric Crane, co-founder here at Flatfile, and excited to chat with you all a little bit about our topic today, which is lowering the cost of data imports, specifically by removing the build versus buy approach and taking a slightly different approach to how you think about adopting software. So just a little bit more about myself. My name is Eric. As I mentioned, I'm the co-founder here at Flatfile, and I've worked across a lot of different industries and segments within and around software, everything from enterprise health tech to early stage startups that focus on analytics and lots of things in between. And the problem that I kept running into over and over again was the fact that I had to build my own data exchange tooling, whether it was a simple CSV importer or designing processes for onboarding large enterprise customers, and again, everything in between. So at a certain point, I said, hey, this is really a problem that should be solved the right way, which is via creating the right tools and systems that allow someone to very easily solve this challenge of data exchange. And so excited to talk with you about that today, but more so just about the thought process that we use and that I have used in the past to make effective decisions about how to choose what to build with in your software. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. We will be recording this webinar and we'll send it to you afterwards in a follow-up email. There's going to be an interactive question, and then as I'm going through these slides as well, you're more than welcome to either in the chat or in the Q&A section, post any questions that you might have. I'll be able to answer those as we're going through, and we'll have a Q&A section at the end. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. There comes a time in every project when you're tasked with deciding how you can lower the cost of that particular project. And in a lot of cases, the way this is done is either by keeping some legacy tech that you might have built and retrofitting it, or removing bought software in order to reduce costs that seem extraneous to what you might be actually doing in your business. What happens, though, is that you miss out on being able to actually take advantage of modernizing your tech stack while at the same time lowering the cost of anything that's sort of standalone as a software tool. So today we're going to go through how to think about modernizing your tech stack in a way that leads to cost savings or a better bottom line for your business, and how framing the challenges build versus buy can really lead to inefficiencies more broadly, but also more specifically in the frame of data import or data exchange. And then how changing your mentality to a build with approach can lead to a long-term benefit to your business and how it operates. So just to start, I think everyone knows this. We live in a complex world where technology exists for everything a business would need and a lot of things that businesses wouldn't. And we're in a near constant battle to keep our business growing while also reducing costs and creating efficiencies, leading us to think about what are the places where I can build or where I can buy. And in the past, I've seen a lot of hesitancy, especially in some larger businesses, to modernize the tech stack because of the inherent cost that associates with software and becoming dependent on it. And this leads to businesses building their own tools to try and cut costs on a specific budget, while also customizing to the business's needs in order to get the efficiency or functionality gains that you need in the business. But the challenge with this approach is that the pace of new innovation already exceeds any sort of one person's or organization's ability to effectively adopt all necessary innovations, whether they be just in-house or whether they be via bought solutions. Like I was mentioning before, there's a tool for everything. In fact, there's probably 7 different tools for everything. And it takes a lot of work to figure out what is the exact right approach to choosing what it is that I want to work with, whether it's something on my own or whether it's working with a vendor who's providing a solution to me. And put more simply, the question, should I build or buy, really isn't the right one to ask. It's better to start with a higher level objective. How can we achieve our business's mission in a profitable way? So if you're working for a business, maybe some of you are working with, a nonprofit organization, but for the most part, the business's job is to create profit, right? At the end of the day, our goal is to, in the course of our mission, actually generate revenue and do that as efficiently as possible. And a lot of times we stop talking about revenue and cost and efficiency when it comes to the tech stack, but this logic applies to your tech stack just as much as any part of your organization. In fact, a lot of times when I or other folks here are thinking about what we want to include in our business as far as like solutions go, a good thing to think about first is, how do I want my income statement to look in the business? So just breaking that down a little bit further, if you have a home-built solution, right, you can expect higher R&D costs. If you're building something entirely yourself instead of working with a vendor, higher R&D costs because your engineering team, your product team, your designers are all working on sort of designing, creating that solution. But it also means, slower revenue growth, right? It's going to take a little bit longer because you have to do it from the ground up. This is what I did with data exchange at nearly every business before Flatfile. And it took a while because we said, hey, we have to not solve whatever it is we're solving as our primary mission of the business, but this other problem here, and we have to do it the right way. That does mean that you get, with a home built solution, it does mean you get lower software spend, and also, could mean potentially, on the flip side, a lower gross margin because there's higher support and hosting costs, right? You're having to support this other sort of part of your solution that you are, including in the overall package of, whatever it is that you're providing. With a fully outsourced solution, let's just say, hey, we're just going to click a button to buy and use this application just however it was designed to work. That definitely lowers your R&D costs, but can also affect your churn and your acquisition rates as well, because that software product wasn't necessarily built with your specific company's goals in mind. It was just built with a general goal in mind of solving a problem in the market. They have the same challenge you have as you're in your own business. It does lead to higher software spend, but it can also mean a higher gross margin because, again, you're not necessarily needing to support all of that software or all of the specific intricacies of that software. You have your vendor there to support that too. So there's this sweet spot kind of in the middle of these is what I'm setting up that I call the build with zone. So you're probably already doing this to an extent. It may be just not top of mind for you, but a great example of this would be like AWS for hosting, or Twilio for notifications, or PubNub for event queues. Like the application layer is already starting to move towards this platform layer. So I would guess that a lot of you use Salesforce, and that's a great example of a company that started with an application layer, independent software that you could just purchase, configure, install, and use, to more of a platform layer where it's actually managing a lot of the data and the workflows in your business. And I think it highlights why the build with approach is so appealing, because it answers that question most favorably, the one I was asking before. How do I want my income statement to look? I want it to be the most profitable income statement possible. So this approach considers your unique business problems, and it acknowledges that you shouldn't be focused on creating every new innovation in-house. Software spend is directly correlated with usage in this type of world, for example, with hosting. So that means that your costs are going to scale more effectively with your usage. All of your R&D costs are generally going to be one-time spend as opposed to ongoing maintenance and needing to add new features. And there's high customer acquisition and retention rates because you're outsourcing sort of the innovation to someone who is solely focused on that particular problem in the world. So just to pause there, I would love to understand more about how you've decided to modernize your tech stack. So basically, what are the ways that you've said, like, hey, we need to figure out how to solve this problem in our company, and we needed to change our tech stack in order to solve that particular problem? Feel free, again, to write this into chat. And also, I will pull this up here. So what are some either software solutions you purchased, things you've decided to build in-house, maybe you're already taking a build with approach? What are some examples of those that you've seen? All right, this one is a private chat. Let me answer this one. So Carly said, we started signing larger enterprise customers with advanced expectations about performance and processing. We had to pay for more server resources in the event that those customers started scaling with us. Yeah, that's a great example here. So like basically when you're signing up, a new class of customers that have expectations around performance and processing, you definitely would need to think about how you're going to modernize or improve your tech stack. And in this case, it sounds like, hey, we're just going to pay for more compute. Let's see, we got one from Kyle here. We're still researching, looking at ways to integrate disparate tech stacks across our organization to get our software to talk to each other. Oh yes, the constant, it's an API, so it'll just work. I touched on that a little bit later, but that doesn't mean that it's just, ready to go and all going to work together seamlessly. So you can also create a lot of inefficiency with having, multiple tech stacks in lots of different versions. And we're no stranger to that here too. Like there's lots of different versions that we need to support. All right, got another one here. Our homegrown notification system was using the same queue as our other systems processes, causing a delay in notifications being sent. We didn't have time to overhaul the entire queuing system with a new product launch coming, so we had to design and build a secondary event platform on top of the first one. Yeah, that's a great example here of building sort of like a solution where basically time was a major constraint here, right? It's like, hey, we have a product launch coming, so there's no way we're going to be able to sort of do anything other than build on top of what was already there. Let's see, we got one from Caleb. Our import tools have been built in-house. Very common thing, Caleb, I've done that a lot and totally understand sort of the challenges and pains inherent to that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Feel free to add more examples in here as you have them, but we'll go ahead and move forward a little bit. And I'll just say, like, for each of those examples, they're symptoms of an underlying problem in your tech stack, whatever it might be, right? So in most of these examples, there was a quote unquote price associated with the solution. So like in that performance and processing example, right, it was just Carly paying for more workers in her fleet. There's also sort of like being able to subscribe to software, right? Like, hey, we're going to subscribe to software. That's thought of as sort of like a price, where it's saying, like, what is the price of that software that we're subscribing to? The challenge is that, or the interesting thing here, though, is that the price is not the same as the cost. So the simplest answer might be, I'll buy that. But that's really focused on the solution, whatever the software does, the invention itself, and not necessarily the core problem that needs solving. And making a trade-off towards not having to think about the problem has implications with a hidden cost to your business. You don't always know why something goes wrong when it does. You cede a lot of the control over how your business requires the system to work. And you can't rapidly respond to business changes a lot of times if it's something where you're saying, hey, I'm just going to go buy that and not have to think about it. And while the price is pretty straightforward for buying, that's not the total cost, though, of that problem to your business. And again, I'm going to get back to that question about the income statement. Where else on your income statement is this going to show up besides just R&D spend? A couple examples here would be like customers getting frustrated because the solution isn't a bespoke fit with what their needs are, or engineers getting frustrated because they have to work around whatever those limitations are that might exist. And you can also think about this when you're building something yourself too. Sure, the price is going to be $0, but the cost can be significant. And I'll just use data import as an example. Folks who are talking about building a data importer themselves, they're really trying to build 3 different types of systems at once. They're building an ETL or EDI that solves for scalable data transfer, but really only for scalable data transfer, right? The data comes in bits and pieces from lots of small data providers. And even if you connect the data to an ETL process, you'd have to contend with a multitude of different data definitions, different validation rules, data hygiene, et cetera. Sometimes you might have one-off data submissions, other times daily, weekly, or monthly syncs. And for technical, organizational, and economic reasons, often you can't have every sort of import be part of a larger ETL process. It just doesn't make sense for you to go take an enterprise grade ETL pipeline and put it up against 100 record import that's run ad hoc by a user. The second system is an RPA system, or robotic process automation. And really that only solves for accessible automation. It's designed for automating a task based on human input after a certain degree of confidence. A good example of this is it's something like a UiPath. I'm sure you've heard of UiPath or something similar, where basically you can go in and teach UiPath how to do certain things, certain workflows, but it's really agnostic of the data or how that data needs to be processed. And then finally, there's data prep. So that's that third solution there. And that really only solves for what I call expert level transformation. So data prep tools are designed for data analysts, data engineers, people who are really innately familiar with data problems. But when you have an end user who isn't necessarily comfortable or doesn't understand the difference between text and a string, then you're going to run into a lot of challenges where you have people who are trying to interact with data that needs to eventually land in the system, but don't necessarily know what the quote unquote right way is to do that. So again, even though the price is $0 for building your own data importer, you need elements of ETL, RPA, and data prep all in there, and therefore the cost can be pretty significant. And so again, you could say, oh, I can just write the code and it'll still be free 99, but there's other challenges to the business here as well too. So for services, let's talk about that. So you could say, hey, you know what? I am just going to create a professional services division, and they're going to create Excel templates and macros. But again, services hits your bottom line, going back to that income statement point before. When I was working at a large EMR vendor earlier on in my career, we spent I think close to 10% of the budget of any given project just on the professional service of managing moving data into and from systems. And a lot of that was challenging because we as humans had to think like machines. We had to be able to go and review very large sets of data for very specific issues. We had to make sure that all of the macros that we were writing were correct. We had to make sure that the data never got in front of anyone else's eyes that shouldn't be seeing that data because it was sensitive healthcare data. It ultimately comes down to another fact in your business, which is that humans don't like being robots. If you have an implementations team and you ask them, hey, what are the things that you like doing with customers? I'm pretty sure they're not going to say, oh, I love sitting behind my desk for 7 hours a day working on spreadsheets in order to make sure that the data gets into the system. Unless you're Jeff Bezos, you probably don't like being or working like a robot or being treated like a robot. And the same is true with services. You could say, well, instead of writing code or having professional services, I could roll with spreadsheet templates. Well, the challenge with spreadsheet templates is, again, getting back to the income statement, is that's a job that you're giving your customer. Hey, welcome to our amazing software. Here's a job for you to do before you can see how valuable it is. That really affects your top line and your conversion rates. Also, it affects your time to value, which has a direct correlation to churn. When I was working at Envoy previously, just right before we started Flatfile, we were giving receptionists CSV templates, and there's nothing wrong with receptionists and office managers using those CSV templates, but it was definitely challenging just to try and write instructions to translate the rules of things like internal keys for a database into human readable headers, and then having to reliably depend on those customers who, again, weren't data experts, they were experts in the office or the workspace, to be able to handle that data challenge. And then again, we still had to, on top of that, write a script so that if the format wasn't exactly right, it wouldn't completely break. Because you think about it, like you're giving someone a spreadsheet template or some sort of other template, they could have the wrong version of Excel. They could not save the macros that were already in the template and therefore not be able to actually, validate the data the right way. They could have typed in their own headers. They could have, emailed as an attachment to someone and accidentally included the wrong person on a list of sensitive information. They could literally do pretty much anything to actually break that process. And then going back to making sure we have an efficient or profitable business, that's not particularly good for your top line. And then custom builds, we already touched on this, but just to reiterate, if you're building a custom product, you're not only having to deal with maintaining all of that, which is a major cost, but also you need to have all of the right experience to solve that particular problem in-house. And if you don't have that experience, or you haven't done that before, or if you don't know what the right way to do it is, you oftentimes can take shortcuts. I remember, when I was working at a social media analytics company, I had to build a custom script to go grab blogger data for social media analytics. So we basically were just analyzing different posts and information that existed in social media. And the challenge with that was it very quickly became this monolith of code that was very challenging to maintain. It was very difficult to teach other new folks about how exactly to use that particular script. You had to use it in a very specific way. And oftentimes, if we didn't account for a change that some blogging platform was going to make, then you'd end up with data that wasn't exactly right and created a poor customer experience for folks who are using the analytics platform. And I guess the cherry on top for all of this is that there's an opportunity cost for any of these solutions, whether you're saying, hey, I want to do this with services, or I want to do this with spreadsheet templates, or I want to do this with custom builds, because you're focused on getting data instead of doing whatever it is your business is doing. Making sure that COVID tests get widely distributed, making sure that financials or the books are getting closed at the end of every month, making sure that the shipping container arrives at the destination on time. Whatever it is that you're doing, you're spending time getting your data into these systems instead of actually focus on the core customer problem that you're trying to solve. So just to sum it up, if you take a build versus buy approach, you're oftentimes just compromising. You're either buying a technology that doesn't perfectly solve the problem, or you spend time, resources, and ongoing maintenance to build something that just won't scale with your business. So there is a middle ground, right? This is where you benefit from functionality and scalability of software that you don't necessarily have to build and maintain, but also can customize it to your specific business needs. In other words, when you're answering the question of how can I most profitably scale my business, you can stop thinking about it in terms of binary build or buy, and instead move towards solutions that allow you to build with. Building with a platform, building with an open ecosystem that allows you to really scale and gets away from the inefficiency of having to, do everything yourself or putting the challenge on your customers entirely. And it also reflects in your P&L too. So in this particular case, I'm obviously biased. I started Flatfile. We're here on a webinar about Flatfile. So we're going to look at some different data import problems as a case study on building with, to just talk through some use cases and how we've seen our customers make the trade-off towards building with. So the first one you're probably very familiar with, self-service import button. I'm sure everyone here, if I ask for a show of hands, probably everyone would raise their hands, multiple times, say like, yes, I used or built or maintained or managed or product managed some kind of import button. And again, you can think like, what could go wrong? When you build this yourself, how hard could it really be? And so let's get specific with that. How do you know if you have a data onboarding problem? Are these experiences existing in your business? Like, do you have a software product where people are supplying you CSV files? And your goal is to help people do it themselves. So let's break down the actual problem here. We said, hey, we want to make sure people are doing it themselves because our business demands it because of the way our business model is designed. And then we also need to make sure that when they're doing this themselves, they have an ability to find success without necessarily you needing to intervene, and therefore not taking advantage of the fact that you don't have services overhead on top of this. So when you're solving this problem, taking that build with approach, you need to think about things like, okay, within like an employee, you need to think about how we validate different types of data if your data is a list of employees. Using that same example, you have to think about relationships of that data. So how does employees relate to dependents or managers? And then also things like dates and formatting references and all different other types of ways that data needs to be corrected and validated in order to be used in your system. And so if we're trying to build all that ourselves, we need to like sort of spec for all the different parts of the solution, and then also spec for the workflow. And so the solution like Flatfiles, for example, tooting our own horn a little bit here, you have the ability to say like, hey, we know that Flatfiles thought about things like data type primitives, the ability to plug in our own custom validations while having standard validations like, is this required or is this value in this pick list as part of the platform? So you don't necessarily need to think about all of the detailed specifics around how would a lookup work technically, and instead say, how does this lookup need to work in this experience, and can I build the solution with this tool set that's coming with the platform? Another example would be like a file feed. So if you have a file feed coming from a legacy system, so if you have an SFTP server where you're getting a daily drop of a CSV file, are the files changing? Do you know what's going to arrive? Do you know when it's going to arrive? Another good example here would be, let's just kind of stick in the world of HCM type data, but enrollment information. So like you could have a use case where enrollment gets delivered periodically to an SFTP bucket. That same enrollment data is in a specific data format like LIMRA XML. Automating the ingestion of the valid data and triggering a notification to review any data that's invalid to a specific named party, and then automatically pushing the data from wherever it's landing into your actual production database. And so this type of solution as well, like again, there's these requirements here to your business that you can use a tool to build, so you don't have to think about, oh, what's it like for us to actually have to parse through an XML style file. Instead, you can just say, cool, there's a plugin or extension for that. I'm going to use that here and not have to get down to the nitty gritty detail about technically how the system works. But you're still building with a tool that allows you to flexibly customize that. Maybe you only use certain parts of the LIMRA spec, which means that, hey, we just need the these particular models and that's it. So again, build with allows you to support a different build with approach using a system like Flatfiles allows you to support this use case without being held to a highly opinionated way of how your workflow or how your data validation rules get executed. Another example we see from our customers is onboarding projects. So are you emailing files back and forth as you work through cleaning them up to get them loaded up into the system? This is the example I talked about earlier when I was working in the healthcare industry. In this case, maybe I'll use a slightly different example. We'll stick with our theme here, but like payroll history. So you could maybe be onboarding someone to try and get all of their historical backlog of payroll history into your platform. You need to think about like, okay, how does that data come in? Well, it comes in like a PDF format, and then there's also like 3 other legacy systems that it's coming in. It's going to be a large data set, right? It's payroll history. It's all the paychecks we've ever issued to all of our employees and all of our contractors. And then you also need to think about handling things like currency, right? Like one system reports a currency value with a $sign. Another one reports it with another field that says USD. And basically need to be able to normalize all of that together. And that's exactly what a system like Flatfile can do, because it allows for a collaboration between different parties, right? Like you don't need to think about how do I build this tool and then also figure out how permission sets work that allow for people to access the right data in the right place? Because a platform like Flatfile will have already thought about all of those challenges. And really, we're just giving you the tools to say, like, hey, organize this how you wish. If you're running large projects with dozens of people in them, you can create large project spaces. If you're running small or short projects that are just ad hoc or maybe add-ons, you can also design that in a slightly different way using a different configuration, but using the same tool set. Sort of like the difference between having a shovel and a trowel, like they're both effectively accomplishing the same things, but you don't necessarily want to use a shovel in your small little vegetable garden. And then this is something I'm very familiar with, integrations that handle variants. So another case where it doesn't seem like it, but behind the scenes, we're exchanging files. Sometimes integrating two systems isn't as simple as it seems. We often use, there's an API for that as the answer, right? You can just say, oh, we're going to buy this product because it has an API, which means it's going to seamlessly integrate with everything that we have. But you don't necessarily, might not necessarily realize that the solution doesn't fit the problem. When I was at Envoy again, we had an integrations roadmap that was 250 items long, and most of those were iterations on various integrations that already had APIs at both ends of the transaction, but needed different configurations or ways to integrate the different systems based on user input or user interaction with the data or customizations that were done to the systems. Again, there's a good example. One of those was Salesforce. We built an integration with Salesforce, but we had a list of probably 20 to 30 items long of different options, configurations, examples that we needed to change just with that quote unquote simple Salesforce integration, because we're trying to build it straight out of the box. And guess what? Everyone's Salesforce implementation is going to be slightly different. So again, taking that build with approach, you can say, hey, we know that we're going to need to be able to integrate this with our API or with the APIs of these two systems. But Flatfile, as an example, can allow an opportunity for you to do it the right way and only do it once, right? We're going to build this integration once. Flatfile is going to live in the middle of this. And then when something changes or goes wrong, or there's like variances between different customers, Flatfile is allowing those customers to be able to decide how they want to map data from one system to the next. So I know that was a lot kind of going through all of those different flows. There's plenty of other more specific use cases that our customers, I've seen from our customers as well as across different software contexts. But ultimately, you're probably already leveraging this build with mentality, regardless of whether it's related to data import. I saw that there were a couple of our customers on the webinar today, so thank you. But also, even if it hasn't been explicit, with things like hosting or messaging. And really, the build with mentality should be utilized in all other mission critical processes to keep your business running, but also keep your business running efficiently. And falling back to build versus buy might be an easy decision to make because it's quick and it's what we're used to, but will ultimately end up costing the business beyond just the price of whatever the price tag is on software that you might be using, whether it's through that direct cost or it's loss of functionality, loss of scalability, loss of customer experience, etc. So just to recap what we talked about, our first step here is really just to reframe the build versus buy question to a build with question. Right. So every time you're starting to think about like, okay, hey, we need to solve this problem in our business. Should we build it or should we buy it? I'm trying to reframe that into, okay, what do we need to build with to create the right solution? The second is to understand the costs of the problem. What is the business cost of the problem today? And thus the business benefit of the solution that you need, and use that as a way to evaluate, okay, what is it that we're actually going to think about building with? And then finally, we covered an example of Flatfile and like the different business costs of the ways that you might, or business costs in different scenarios or workflows that you might need to be able to accommodate for, and then how to use, again, Flatfile in this example to solve those problems using a build with approach by being able to rely on the tool itself to handle sort of the core fundamental challenges that you don't necessarily want to or have to think about, while making sure to keep a view of your specific custom business needs that fit better with the problem that you're having. So yeah, this is literally what I woke up and thought about today. It's what I will be thinking about after this session today. And it'll be what I'm thinking about next week and next month and next year. So if you want to, figure out how to exchange data better, or more broadly, how to transition to a build with mindset, feel free to let me know. And of course, if you'd like to see building with in action, feel free to check out flatfile.com. Really excited to have all of y'all here on the call today. And I think we'll open it up for a few more questions with the, whatever time left permits. And if you don't have any questions, thank you so much for joining us. And as a reminder, we will follow up via email with a recording. Thanks y'all so much.